we are likely to look ahead. And here, what is the state? First, quickly, this kind of information is all over in the news. Today, we're taking, if you look at the footprints, we're already consuming 1.5 planet already. And the current level of business as usual model will, if we continue with China growing, with India growing, rest of the Asians growing, with the 52% of GDP, they say we need about 3 planets. Some scientists have calculated 3 by 2050, and by 2100, maybe more planets. The simple message here is the business as usual model is not going to be available. So we need a huge transformation, and there are footprints people have calculated. I was surprised to see that Australia, Singapore, Mongolia per capita basis is quite high. The big bubble includes Singapore because of the small population, I think. It's not because of anything but the population. So the trend, if I capture in one slide, the energy demand is projected to almost double. Oh, this one by one, okay. Let me put it all together. Almost double in Asian Pacific by 2030. Transport, fastest growing source of CO2. In fact, if we do not handle the transport issue, we're never going to be able to meet the 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees scenarios. This is the most important area. And this is the area where things haven't happened very much. Urban. We're adding, as I said, 44 million people per year to the Asian cities. Water. Significantly exceeded, demand is significantly exceeding the supply side by 2030, especially with India and China. I have the data for that, if you like. The biodiversity is going down. And climate vulnerability, you started mentioning already, and 7 of the world's 10 most vulnerable countries are in Asia. Quickly, a few lines on each of these. First, on the energy side. 2010 scenario, Asia used to emit 37% of the global CO2. By 2035, we'll be 47%. And if you take further, 2050, we will be even beyond the rest of the world. Second, we recently, just 2 weeks ago, we released this report, how did the Asia energy outlook looks like in the next 2 decades. Now see how 2010 scenario says you got the oil, coal, you got the gas, biomass, nuclear, hydro, renewable. After all the assessment looking at country data, what we found is the coal is going to be even more. The coal is going to be the #1 driver by 2035. And renewable, yes, it will increase, but only very small. It's never going to be able to catch up the need of the energy in the region. So the story is not very good there, that we will continue to be very much dependent on the fossil fuel. And these kind of data, you might have seen it. Look how the China is growing, how the green one is China, the next is United States, and the one below is India. So we all know it's happening in China, India. So the challenge is the current status, where we have the fossil fuel using most of it, gas and the energy efficiency renewable, how do we try to get by 2050 upside down pyramid? And this is the challenge. How are we going to do that? Now look at the transport side. This was ADB and IEA. We worked together to see what's going to look like by 2050. What it says is not very good. It said the cars and motorcycles will continue to increase. And I think we're not in a path to be able to stop them. And the public transport, walking, bicycle, sustainable transport, doesn't seem to be picking up either, looking at the investment of each of the country that we look at it and the policy. So it doesn't look very good. So therefore, one of the significant things we need to do is how to transform the transport sector in order to be able to make a safe world. And then we try to see what is something quickly doable. We'll try to look at the data until 2020. What does it look like for the next 5-6 years? And it doesn't look good. The trend for the next 5 to 8 years is simply to be fixed. There's no way we can change. The cars and motorcycle will continue to increase. Public transport will not pick up to the level we want. So we're really locked into this transport situation as of now. The challenge again is, can we change it? And therefore, I like to end by saying that we need to transform the transport sector, without which we're not going to meet the CO2 agenda. A few words on the urbanization. If you look globally, there are 600 cities which will have about 80% of the GDP. Out of that, 23 there are mega cities, 19 in Asia, 577 secondary cities which are population less than 10 million will be in Asia, and they're going to drive the growth. By 2050 or so, most people, 3/4, 75, 80% of the people will be living in urban areas, small or big, depending. Therefore, the really future of Asia is how to make cities livable. Energy, water, transport, and slums, etc., taken all together. The urban challenges, as I said, we have 1.6 billion urban people in Asia, to be living in Asia. 500 million are urban poor. In ADB, we call the two phases of urbanization. You go to Manila, you find one area as good as Singapore, as good as New York, and then you have 20% of the people living in slums. 20% of 14 million is 2.8 million people. That's a lot. And that's the same case in other. Second thing is, what we have not been able to do is bring in this economic cost, which is costing us 2 to 4% of the GDP, either through urban traffic and rising congestion, etc. I think we got to internalize this into our decision making, and that will help a bit to move into the mass transits and other. Again, therefore, I'd like to end by saying that we need to turn our cities to green, smart, inclusive, and competitive. I say competitive because cities will compete. They're already competing within the country, like in China. One city competes with the other. They are competing in the region. Singapore and Hong Kong competes for financial center all the time. And there will be Shanghai in future. There will be others who will trying. So they will need to be competitive. And one of the most important criteria for being a competitive city is it should be livable, so that smart people will come and live. And that's why I think Singapore has been so good for attracting good brains and having its own people stay in the country. The next area is water. I don't need to talk very much in water in Singapore. You all know. I'll just tell you one global figure. The supply gap, if you refer to this figure, has become the starting point for much of the current narrative surrounding the water security. 40% of the supply gap projected by 2030. We cannot be doing the way we like it. We may have to ration it to the cities. We may have to tell the hotel, please recycle 90% of your water. Things of that type which may need to come in. We released a report this year, in the beginning of the year, called Water Security. And to confront that, how do you handle the household? How do you handle the urban? The economic aspects of it, the resilience, climate change aspects of it, and the environmental water security. All I say here is the water is really a security issue in many countries at the moment. A declining biodiversity, the data shows that it is going down, and some of them which has been lost forever. Forest train is interesting. The forest train seems to be a little going up, but it's not the same kind of forest. There's an enormous amount of reforestation that's happened in China, and it's mainly because of the China. I would think the Asian average looks good. Whereas in Indonesia, PNG, Laos, which has extensive forests, the data is not that healthy. Ocean health. Professor Koh, again, you know all about it. There's been very less attention given to ocean somehow. Whereas everything that we do eventually gets there. The water, wastewater, eventually everything goes to the ocean. Now, if we're not able to look at the ocean differently and keep it well, I think this correct me, Professor Ko, I think this has not been given as much attention as it should receive. Of course, you had a great conference here sometime last year, I think. So the point we're making is, please let us save what we have at least. Let's protect what we have, the ecosystem remaining in the Asia-Pacific region. This is where the Green Climate Fund Red Plus agenda will be extremely helpful. Valuing the ecosystem. I think we need even more economic analysis to show that these ecosystems are important from economic perspective, and we're putting some work in this area to convince decision maker that they are worth saving it. And finally, climate change, which has been spoken, everyone knows of it. This region is very vulnerable, the coastal region, etc. Data is available all over. These are the countries which you can see, which are vulnerable from floods, which are vulnerable for storms, sea level rise, agriculture. So most of this comes from the IPCC report. But what I'm finding difficulty in our investment, in our banking businesses, it's not good enough to say that 1/3 of Bangladesh will be flooded. I need to know exactly where, what, and how, what can be done or what cannot be done for investment purposes. If I'm going to build infrastructure, will my infrastructure be safe? We don't have that kind of analysis and data. And that's what we're trying to generate. The next is the economics of climate change. I mentioned we have done some work now in different parts of the countries. When we did for Southeast Asia, we were able to tell them, look, you will lose about 6.7% of the GDP by 2100. And these numbers have come in and done for various reasons on an individual basis, regional basis. While it's been appreciated,